Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm Frankie Oliver, your host and founder of New Society, and today I'm joined by PRWeek UK editor John Harrington. Hi, John.
Hi, Frankie.
And not long from the snowy mountains of Davos, we are delighted to be joined by Arlo Brady, CEO of Freuds. Arlo, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me. Great to be with you.
So, for more than 17 years, Arlo has been working at Freuds, first as a special advisor to Matthew Freud, and then for the last 7 years, he's also been chief executive of Freud Communications and of Freud's Group. He's also chairman of the Blue Marine Foundation, one of Europe's leading environmental NGOs, trustee of the Sustainable Food Trust. He's also co-chair of the S30, a group of the world's leading chief sustainability officers convened by the then Prince of Wales and now King Charles. Arlo's background is eclectic. Started out at his local comprehensive school in Norfolk, good for you. And after a stint of flipping burgers at McDonald's, he then moved on to university to study his childhood passion, geology. This led him to sustainability consultancy and then to business school, where he specialised in the reputational risks and opportunities associated with sustainability, the subject of his first book, The Sustainability Effect. So that is quite the CV, Arlo, and I have to admit I cut it back. That's the short version. So first of all, before we kick into all the PR stuff, what is it with Norfolk and sustainability? Why are there loads of people that move into sustainability from there? Is there something in the water?
Interestingly, there are quite a few PR people from Norfolk as well.
Yeah.
There's a sustainability contingent and then there's
there
a
really
PR
is.
contingent. So if you go down there during the summer months, you will find quite a few PR bosses lurking around. I won't name them, but they know who they are.
That sounds like the new networking opportunity of 2024 then. So moving on then to this week's show, we have got a number of topics to discuss with Arlo, including the big global trends at Davos and what they mean for the PR industry, as well as an update on trading and perhaps a little bit of insight on what it's like to have worked with Matthew Freud for nearly 2 decades. So let's kick off first with trading. Arlo, a lot of agencies have described 2023 as challenging and difficult. What's your view on recent trading and how are you feeling about things in general? Are you feeling optimistic?
I am feeling optimistic. Yeah, I think it's going to be a good year, not least because in our case, in April, it is the beginning of our 40th year, which is a cause for some celebration. You did make me sound old in that introduction. And Freud's
I think we all a bit old.
maybe I actually am at this point. But yeah, Freud's is quite old as well. It's been around for a long time compared to, a lot of the other players in the space. So, we're going to be having a little bit of a year of celebration as well. Last year was not too bad a year for us. We thought it was quite a good year. We're quite a diversified group now. So there's lots of different things going on within the Freuds ecosystem, which helped to balance things out. Some things did really well, some things didn't do quite so well. But on the whole, it wasn't a bad year. And I'm feeling relatively optimistic about 2024. I think it depends whether you're asking that question about the UK or further afield. I think there's plenty of good prospects for public relations around the world, and there's lots of markets that are doing really well at the moment. The UK is still a little in the doldrums. Consumer confidence is relatively low. Inflation is still quite high. I think that, and I don't think that's going to change a great deal in the immediate future, but we have an election this year and it's possible that things get better. It's possible that there's a confidence bump, depending on exactly when that election occurs. It's possible that there's a bit of a bump around that. So yeah, I feel quite confident. The other thing to say, I think, is that having said that there are geographies that are doing really rather well, there are also sectors that are doing rather well or for other reasons are particularly competitive at the moment. And the examples of those would be technology, AI, space is burgeoning at the moment and in need of comms support to explain what it's all about and what it's going to do, possibly more on that later. The energy transformation's well underway. That's been documented quite a lot recently, but there's a lot of change taking place in that industry, and wherever there's change, there's need for comms. The automotive world is undergoing a lot of change at the moment. We're going to see quite a lot of competitiveness in that space. So that's just some examples. I think there's lots of great opportunities out there at the moment.
And is that largely moving your client base, would you say, to more sort of corporate than consumer facing work?
No, I don't think so. I think there are lots of corporate opportunities because we're living in this incredibly complicated world where you never know what's coming at you next. And I think that corporate leaders, C-suite leaders, are needing communications professionals, people that have some sense of understanding of that world to be by their side and helping them to navigate that world. So there's definitely a huge opportunity in that in this moment of complexity and fragility to have corporate support, but the same is true in the consumer space.
Looking back at last year then and looking forward to this year, from a Freud's perspective, what was performing really well and where those shifts have been?
Yes. So within Freud Communications itself, I think you're right. I mean, corporate communications did do quite well last year, but we increasingly are delivering consumer comms work around the world, and quite a few of other geographies where the economic situation is slightly rosier have been great for us. So, I mean, I feel like both sides of the suite of activities that we offer are doing quite well, but just in different places. I think it's also worth saying that we've grown quite a significant content business over the course of the last few years, and there's an awful lot of interest in that as more and more businesses focus on thinking about how they can tell their story direct to their audience without necessarily going via traditional media or other forms of stakeholder.
Yes, of course. And in terms of international growth, are there particular markets that you're performing really well in now then?
I think that there's lots of opportunity in Asia, in India, in the Middle East, and America. The US market is still growing faster than what we're seeing here in the UK. So all of those are huge opportunities. In our case, I would say probably most of our growth has come from the US and bizarrely continental Europe. Last year, we saw a reasonable amount of growth from continental Europe. Perhaps finally we're getting over the Brexit frosting out.
Yeah. And what does that mean, therefore, for your local offices versus kind of global network and so forth? How does that work at Freuds?
We don't have lots of barriers between the different people that are within the organisation. Offices don't work on their own. They don't have their own bottom line, so as to speak. So, everybody that works for Freuds works all over the world. We don't just have a UK office and the people in the UK work on UK things. They will be working on lots of different stuff. We've got plenty of French people, German people working in our office in London, working on things in other territories. So our approach has not been to open offices in lots of places all around the world, not least because we've got quite a strong culture and we feel as though we want to sort of keep a hold of that and make sure we're investing in it.
But you're not finding that clients are expecting that local office and actually doing more consultancy at kind of global strategic level?
I think that if you were in the business of selling arms and legs, then probably they would want that. But, we've chosen to go after the more of the consultancy end of the spectrum. Yeah. So, people are very happy to take that from wherever it might hail.
I wanted to move on to Davos, as Frankie was saying. You recently came back. People who haven't been or don't know, what happens at Davos? What's it all about? And why do comms people go?
How long have you got? We could have a whole podcast.
Unabridged.
Yeah, we could have a whole podcast on what Davos is all about. There's a lot of mythology around it, I suppose, that's built up over the years. It's where the masters of the universe types come together to discuss the state of the world, to make deals, to have bilats with their peers all in one place at one moment in time, to share perspectives, to build relationships. Some would say that it's where people come together to plot world domination or how to make pots more money. But other people would probably be more charitable and they would say that Davos is the spiritual home of globalization and all that unlocks in terms of development and collaboration around the world. And leaders come together once a year to think about how to keep that train on the tracks, which up until relatively recently, you would have just assumed that was obviously the way things are moving, but it's not quite so obvious now. So, there's lots of different perspectives. I think probably some of that's a little bit unfair. It's, in a nutshell, a gathering of mostly really rather special, incredible people that are doing jaw-dropping things. the official aim, I think, is something along the lines of improving the state of the world. And it's, from my point of view, it's just incredibly inspirational to spend a week amongst a bunch of entrepreneurs, leaders, politicians, campaigners, journalists, all of whom are unbelievably impressive. And it's a sort of annual kick in the pants that, you have to do better, because all these people are just so incredible. You end up coming away feeling inadequate. As to why are communications people there? Well, there were rather a lot of communications people there. And I think probably they're there because it's not scientific. So I don't know for sure, but it's one of the biggest gatherings, I would say, of media professionals in the world, right at the beginning of the year, just when media wants, to understand, like you do on this show, projections for the year and everything else. It's a fantastic place for companies, brands, individuals to tell their story to a small but very powerful audience of opinion formers. But not only that, you can get it out to the rest of the world because there's this huge media presence there. So there's a massive spike at the beginning of the year during this week for business stories, as everybody, the world's media gravitates around World Economic Forum and starts to think about how it can dedicate an awful lot of editorial to this space. So that's why that you've got comms people there. The flip side of that, of course, is that it's a very risky environment. It's one of the only times in the year when media are let loose, in a literal sense of the word, on CEOs and founders and leaders of businesses. Those people that you read about in the media, they're all there wandering around up and down the high street in the town. And it is probably one of the only places where, if you were a budding business journalist, where you can actually doorstep a CEO and catch them out. And there's always one or two every year. Last year, I think it was the Pfizer CEO who got doorstepped by a guy who wanted to challenge him on the efficacy of his vaccine. And it was a really cringeworthy sort of moment. Have a look on YouTube, you find the clip. This year, there were a few, but probably the most notable one was the CEO of Fujitsu, who got caught by the Beeb, around their involvement in the Royal Mail story. So, it's a fascinating event, lots of amazing stuff going on, but there's a very good reason for communicators to be there. Also, of course, don't forget the public affairs professionals. It's a lot of public affairs professionals there because it's one of the few occasions when you can gather together business leaders and regulators and have a bit of an off-the-record conversation about the future of regulation and what businesses think about that. So, yeah, that's in a nutshell.
But having been there quite a few times, have you ever had that sort of experience of the sort of doorstepping or attempted and that sort of thing? Or have you sort of kept away from, as in sort of your clients or other people you've been?
Yes, well, no one's ever tried to doorstep me. I should watch out for PRWeek lurking in the snowdrifts in the future. No, I don't think anybody's ever done that to one of my clients. But, the approach that of course, not all our clients follow our advice tightly, but I think that in this world, CEOs need to appear more open and in touch with what's going on in the world around them. And I would like to think that if one of our CEOs, one of our client CEOs, did get stopped on the street, I think it would probably be quite a good conversation. It looks awkward when somebody is definitely not the kind of person that wants to be interviewed and wants to talk to the media. There are some CEOs that spend a lot of time hiding from the media. And if they get caught out, then they sometimes say something because they haven't prepared for it. They haven't sat in a studio and had someone throw various connotations of a question at them. They're just not ready for it. And it's surprising how many leaders turn up to Davos without having put in that homework.
Well, it's amazing how many CEOs only do media training once in a lifetime, right?
Yeah, we often talk about that because my view of media training is that it's a bit like a sort of athletic muscle. Everybody's done it at some stage in their career. Somebody's forked out for a little bit of media training for somebody. But if you don't keep doing it, every year on a regular basis and updating your stock answers to things and making sure that you're appearing as relevant as possible, you just won't be ready for when that moment occurs. And quite often you just won't be able to predict when that moment occurs.
Yeah, well, there's lots of CEOs who don't like doing media training or talking in the media, isn't it? But that's a warning sign from Davos to be well prepared. So moving forward to some of the key trends that I've seen your recent LinkedIn piece on Davos, and obviously there's so many issues to discuss, but it sounds like AI was the leading subject of most of the events that you went to. And it was really interesting when you talked about in your piece around AI overclaim and your feelings around that, as well as job losses and so forth. Could you take us through a little bit on that and your thoughts around why you think there may be an overclaim happening right now?
Well, in any given year, there's always one topic that everybody likes the sound of, and that is the dominant phrase that if you were word clouding everything that everybody's saying, this pops out. Probably last time it was crypto. Everybody was talking about crypto. Now very few people are talking about crypto. It completely goes off of the agenda and it gets replaced with something else. In this case, AI, the more you learn about it, the more you realize how phenomenally impactful it's going to be on everything that we do, our home lives, the way that we work, communications, trusts, all of these different aspects. It's definitely going to be hugely impactful. But what I learn is that it's only as impactful as the data that you put into it. Because, all of these large language models that exist, they are using incredibly powerful technology to draw conclusions, but they can only work with what they've got. So if the data input isn't there, then the output that you get won't be there. And so I think it'll take a little longer than perhaps people think before we get to the point that AI is solving all of our woes. And the thing for business leaders certainly to think about is probably how can they capture more data so that they can use AI in a better way to make better decisions. But the overclaim point is because there's that gap with the data. The data
evolution
isn't quite there yet. So people every session I went to at Davos had some element of AI in the conversation. And I think that AI is just not going to solve all of our problems in the short term. That just is manifestly untrue. It'll take a little while before it gets to the point where it's capable of analyzing data in the right way.
So there's obviously lots of other big trends around misinformation expected around AI with the elections this year, job losses. I mean, I think, Gates and Branson have said that we might all be working a 3-day week and we need a universal basic income and all of those sorts of issues that are coming through. But thinking specifically about Freuds then, how do you see AI actually impacting your business and what you do for your clients?
I think that I probably see it impacting us in a variety of different ways. The first way is in efficiency. I would imagine that it will make some of the basic tasks that we do quicker to deliver. So,
what do you think? Press releases, ring rounds? What's going AI?
Any of those basic things, really. You don't have to talk about PR particularly in of its own right. You can think about any aspect of your life. Some of the more basic things that one might do in life will be automated in the future. In that article that you're referencing there, I also talk a little bit about robotics, which I think is a under talked about trend, particularly in manufacturing. There's the rise of the humanoid robot, which sounds like science fiction. It's actually on the verge of being a serious thing. And I don't think we're going to see humanoid robots in PR agencies for a little while to come. But, some of the more basic tasks, I think, will be automated. So there's that aspect. Then I think probably the most significant aspect is what AI will do to people's perception of the information that we're putting out there into the public space. So, comms agencies are working with their clients to pump out information, and maybe that information won't be trusted quite as much as it has been historically. If you look over the last 10 years, probably the world of PR spent a lot of time diversifying its definition of opinion former. When I started all those years ago, as you pointed out at the beginning, it was the traditional media universe that were the principal target for a PR agency. And we didn't move away from that. They're still the people that we've got the main relationships with, but we've diversified that significantly. are they going to be trusted voices into the future, or in a world where people are on the hunt for misinformation and disinformation, is it that they're going to go back to trusted sources of information, trusted media outlets, or even wanting to hear the information direct from the horse's mouth themselves, from business leaders on platforms like X or whatever, where they're actually directly talking without middleman interference? So I think that area is fascinating. Who knows? It's definitely going to have very significant impacts on the industry.
Well, and also I suppose that based on the assumption that we trust the media, editorial media that we have now, I mean, do we? I mean, there's actually quite a lot of media sources that I think have questionable misinformation in them as well. So,
yes,
there's a handful that I think we could actually say are really trusted.
Yes, and there are a handful of media outlets that spend a lot of time, effort and money on fact-checking and all of this, and they're less and less. And I wonder whether this is an opportunity for them to highlight their wares.
Yeah, 100%. So you also talked about the sort of UK PLC and the rise of sort of the new economic forces of India. China's not so new, but big, and also the presence of Saudi Arabia at Davos. Kind of where does that leave us in your views about where we are from a UK PLC perspective?
I think the UK has probably been treading water since Brexit, really. I mean, it feels like we haven't really found our place in the post-Brexit world. And I think that we are all sitting here drumming our fingers, waiting for an election and waiting for some certainty of direction as to where this country's going. Nobody's really effectively painted a vision for the country. And some of these other countries like Saudi Arabia, India, China, they have a much clearer view of where they're going as a nation. So I think, are we loud enough in the public space? No, but we don't actually have a story. If the UK were a client coming to us, you would be saying, hang on a minute, you don't need to turn up the volume. You need to work out who you are, where you're going. Why do you exist? What is it you're trying to achieve? And how are you going to achieve it? And when you've got all of those things together, then you can go out there and engage. And the UK hasn't really done that for some time. Having said that, there isn't a negative view of the UK. I think there's a pretty positive view of the UK out there at the moment, and its economic prospects.
I'm utterly stunned to hear that. I mean, weren't we the embarrassment abroad for so long, really? It wasn't negative, and all the kind of corruption that's going on in our government and the ridiculousness of many of our politicians.
Those stories don't always make it, into the big wide world. We're very fixated in the UK on some of the topics that are of significant public interest, but they're not necessarily the things that the rest of the world is talking about. There are lots of fantastic things about the UK that we should be shouting about. One example, which was in the FT on the weekend, is gaming. The UK is world HQ for gaming, and we're not really talking about that on the stage. We're not picking that up. Our science, technology emanating from that golden triangle between Oxford and Cambridge and London, it's world beating. Look at the role that those scientists played during the pandemic. There's lots of amazing things in the UK that people in other countries around the world know about us, but we don't often talk about that in our local media. So ironically, I think they're more positive about us than we are.
Reassuring to hear. So, Arlo, one of the other big issues is where we are with ESG and obviously also the sustainable development goals that we're all hoping to achieve by 2030. Woke-washing has just been an absolute nightmare, and obviously, a big issue that you've talked about as well, that's obviously impacting the investment in sustainability, green hushing, all of those issues. I mean, how are you feeling about this issue? And, I know that you said at the end of your LinkedIn piece, the climate crisis was there, but it felt like it was one of the last things on the agenda.
Yeah, well, that's true. But of course, a lot of those same people not a month before were in Dubai for 2 weeks, maybe not the whole 2 weeks, talking seriously about this topic and making significant progress.
Yeah, I was interested. You thought the COP28 was a success.
Well, it was a relative success considering. Yeah, I think it was a relative success. So going back, ESG, I think, is an awful term. I've never liked it, and I've never liked bucketing all of those things together in one space. And it shouldn't surprise us that those terminology gems are not liked by a big chunk of people around the world. So I think we should, as far as possible, try and avoid using awful acronyms and focus on what it is we're trying to do together, giving people opportunity, building new businesses, whatever it might happen to be. Try and use a language that resonate with people, which is why I say one of my big takeouts from Davos is that we've got this huge complicated world out there, and when we're dealing with those really complicated issues, we really need to find a way of telling our stories better with less jargon and less complexity. So I think business leaders need to learn some tactics from populist leaders. No, I'm not saying...
Interesting. So more slogans?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
But trying to explain better what it is you're trying to achieve in a way that addresses the hopes and fears of ordinary people. And of course, you've got to understand the hopes and fears of ordinary people and not be isolated in an ivory tower. In order to be able to do that, sometimes business leaders look and sound like they've been locked up in an ivory tower somewhere and are imposing their will on the world. And I don't think they are. I think they just need to find a better way of communicating. And in order to do that, obviously I'm biased, but I think that they need to work more closely with communications agencies, bring them into the C-suite and help, because we are companies' window on the world. When you work for a big corporation, very often you're always looking inwards. You're very rarely looking outwards too much. And I often think of our role as an agency is going into companies and helping them to find the key to open the window, throw it open and have a look outside, see what's going on, and think about how what's being discussed in that room relates to what's going outside. And quite often people get that wrong. And I think that's at the heart of the ESG woke washing debate, where people just they're talking entirely different languages. And it's confusing people. And then on the SDGs, you did mention the SDGs. I mean, yeah, they are not going
17
very
of them. 17 of them. Yeah.
17 of them, all 17, I think, are probably not going very well. It's pretty unlikely that we're going to meet those. But, there is lots of corporate appetite to push on activity in those different areas, not least because employees are really keen on working for organizations that are focused on some of these topics that make the world a better place.
But looking specifically back at woke washing as well and what you might be advising your clients, I was sat next to a head of communications at a very well-known global brand at the PRWeek Awards, and she was telling me what a nightmare and how worried they are about communicating anything around their sustainability credentials, and most especially within the US. And actually have backed off massively on what they do, because actually even just doing anything good seems to be bad. So where are you in terms of your consultancy with clients around that? Do you think it's actually about different framing, or is it about holding back until the culture wars move on or drive us into a place we don't want to go?
I think it's true to say that quite a few companies are holding back. I don't think it's true to say that quite a few companies are stopping action. I think a lot of companies are marching forwards on these agendas with some pace and doing some really exciting work, but they're not necessarily talking about it as much as they have done historically. That's because it's more difficult to talk about this kind of stuff in this environment. It's definitely difficult to talk about it. That doesn't, just because something's difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. A lot of companies don't spend a lot of time looking out of the window and don't understand that environment into which they're introducing this terminology, this activity. And if they spent a little more time understanding that world, they would probably find a form of words that would help them to better engage. I don't believe that it's a completely hostile environment to all of these different SDG related topics. It just isn't. You just have to find the right way of engaging people and find the right time and the right delivery mechanism, and people do respond well.
So Goals House is obviously a really big event for Freuds. I think runs a number of events. I think you were at COP, you're at Davos and so forth. Can you tell us a bit about Goals House? What happens in Goals House, and what were the kind of some of the key themes that were coming away? I mean, were they reflective of the themes that you've obviously just talked about? Be great to hear a bit of the inside track.
We helped to launch the SDGs back in 2015, I think it was. And ever since then, we've been really keen as an agency to try and make as much impact as possible on delivering the goals. So there's goals that were created by the UN to try and make the world a better place by 2030. And we wanted to make a contribution towards helping accelerate progress on the goals. And we spent quite a lot of time thinking about what we could do. And we deliberately go after work that is focused on those goals. Not always, not our whole portfolio isn't orientated towards the goals, but we spend quite a lot of time looking at how we can work on those kinds of topics. But because of the day job that we have, we've been going to World Economic Forum and United Nations, UNGA Week, New York Climate Week in New York. And all these different big events. And the observation that we've had is that you quite often see all the bankers in one area talking to each other, and all the NGO people over there, and all the media people over here, and they're very rarely sort of interacting with one another. And we look around, and because of the role that we play, we know a lot of those different communities, and we thought, well, why don't we bring them together, curate conversations between that diverse community of internationally renowned activists and leaders and thinkers and doers. And if we brought them together in one place, maybe they might partner together. The last goal, 17, is partnership. The goals can't be achieved without partnership. So we thought, well, that's probably where we can help. Goal 17, we can bring people together. And we can create the right environment for people to do cool stuff together. So we created this thing called Goals House. It pops up in various different ways, more than 10 times a year in different geographies. And
it's quite a lot, isn't it? 10 times a year. Yeah.
It's quite a big thing. Yeah. I mean, it's quite a big community now of
Are there any examples of things that have happened in Goals House that you can name? Oh, yes, that deal was struck here. That moment, that relationship was made here.
We produce a impact report every year, which talks about all the different things that we think come out of Goals House. So you're more than welcome to have a look at that. But it's extremely difficult to I think once you claim ownership over something, nobody wants to, if you come to Goals House and make a deal, Arlo's that's mine.
Slightly less discreet.
We don't treat it like that. We want people to come together and feel comfortable that they're in a safe place, and they can talk about something and they can go off and take credit for it if that's what they're looking for. But I do recommend having a look at the impact report, because we do make an effort to try and capture the positive impact that we have through Goals House.
And do you think, just finally on the SDGs, at what point is there some sort of reckoning around, are we still going for the SDGs for 2030?
Well, we're halfway through timeline now. So I would say, this year is probably quite a big reckoning moment. It's not like the Paris Agreement and COP, where now we've got this thing called the annual stock take, where it's pretty clear where we're at in terms of global performance. So I don't think something like that exists for all 17 goals. But I would imagine as we get closer to the point of delivery, there'll be more and more pressure. But I think we've probably made quite a lot of progress on development and less progress on the environment. That would be what I would imagine we'll see. And the tension between those two things is fairly obvious. The more we develop human capacity, the more challenge there is on our environment and our natural resources.
We shall see what this year brings. So, and then finally, probably the most interesting question of the whole podcast. Obviously, you've worked with Matthew for nearly 2 decades now, and it's really hard to make, when you see those magic relationships work for a long period of time, there's usually a secret sauce somewhere in that relationship that's kind of made it work. Tell us about what's made it work with you and Matthew over the last 17 years. And it's very interesting also to think about Matthew's foresight in terms of hiring you and growing the corporate side of the business, all those years ago. Great foresight. As when Freuds was probably much more kind of consumer brand business, right? Obviously, you don't tell personal stories, but sort of, is it a sort of yin and yang of different skills coming together?
Yeah, probably. That's probably a pretty good description. I don't want to embarrass him, and he does get embarrassed, Matthew. Surprisingly, you wouldn't necessarily expect that if you know him, but
no, I really didn't expect that. But
no, he does get embarrassed. I've had a lot of fun with Matthew over the years. You're right. I mean, I think it is about 17 years, and he's a real character. He's an enormous character. There's no doubt in my mind that he's one of the most creative people I've ever come across. And I've met a lot of creative people over the years. He has a sort of view on everything. Donkey's years later now, I never really leave his office without some kind of a gem, some different perspective on something, a different way of looking at something. And it's often a different perspective or an idea that I don't think anyone else would or could have come up with. And this sort of unique, informed creativity backed by a strong set of values, I would say. I mean, ultimately, you're right. We are very different people. If you asked somebody that knew both of us well, they would say, yeah, we are completely different characters. That difference is probably one of the reasons why differences attract, as they say, but I think it's the values set, probably the compass that we both have that seems to be aligned in the same direction. But yeah, he's an amazing guy. There's no question he's an amazing, innovative, creative person.
And how does it work in terms of the sort of running of the day-to-day business? Are you working together on the running of the day-to-day business, or does Matthew play a kind of different role? I mean, obviously, I know he was off producing a film and winning an Oscar of late, where he said he didn't really see his family, let alone probably employees of Freud. So how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, he is around. He's not present. He's definitely around most days. This simple answer to that question is that I think we have a sort of natural balance as to what I focus on and what he focuses on, and it's never been written down. It's not like our chief operating officer, Rebecca Hurst, I'm sure would love us to have a proper job description so that we could.
Oh, she's not the lady stuck in the middle, is she?
No, she's not stuck in the middle. Actually, she's been there a lot longer than I have, so she knows Matthew even better than I do. No, we have a sort of natural way of doing things together. I know what he likes and he knows what I like, and we tend to lean into those things that we're passionate about, and every now and then those things come together and we work together on some things quite well. I don't always agree.
So je ne sais quoi sometimes of relationships, you can't specifically define it, can you? But
no, when it's been going for quite a long time, it's difficult to define it. But there's no question we don't always agree about everything, but he provokes me to look at the world in a slightly different way. Perhaps he might say the same, I don't know, but it's an enjoyable relationship.
Well, Arlo, thank you so much. That brings us to the end of this show. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to our listeners that you enjoyed the show, and we look forward to you joining us next time.